In this week's episode of Non-Native Creative, I had a great time speaking with James Catchpole, aka Mr. OK Jazz. Originally from Brooklyn, he moved to Seoul with his family for about 3 years when he was a kid. Eventually, his interest in film and in music brought him to Japan, where he's lived now for more than 20 years. During his time in Japan, he's established a long-running project that documents jazz bars or listening bars in the Tokyo area. He's created an English-language online resource that gives details about tons and tons of tiny venues all around Tokyo, with the aim of sharing information with music enthusiasts about where to go and what to do and what you can expect in these different places. He's also hosted a long-running radio show and has now shifted to doing his own podcast where he shares music and music history. This talk covers a lot about music appreciation and the culture of music appreciation in Japan. You can find a link to his website and to his jazz photography project, as well as links to his social media portals from the links in the description. Enjoy! On this week's episode of Non-Native Creative, I am very excited to welcome James Catchpole, aka Mr. OK Jazz, to the show. Thank you very much for coming to speak with me.
Thanks for inviting me in.
I'm very happy to have the chance to talk to you. I've followed you on Twitter for a while, I think, and I see your tweets here and there about music and places to go in Tokyo to listen to music. So I'm excited to speak with you today in depth about what you're up to.
Well, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I want to begin today's discussion with the same question that I ask everybody, which is to please think of yourself as an X-Men. I borrowed the question from the X-Men, or rather just like superhero stories in general. I would like to ask you, if possible, to share about your origin story. If you had one thing that kind of kicked off the road that kind of got you to where you are today, what was that thing or that experience?
I would say it's not really just one thing. It's a combination of a couple of things. Mm-hmm. But I was born in Brooklyn, New York. Okay. My parents were not from the city, though. They came from different places. I grew up just a regular kid in New York City. But I was surrounded by a lot of different people. My best families were from Guyana, Hong Kong, Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. And so there was always a kind of a international feeling there, you know, especially with music, you know. But I would say that the really defining thing for me was when I was 10, I remember my parents, they sat me and my sisters down. And this was in 1984, so it was a long time ago. Okay. And they said, listen, we're going to be moving. And we were like, what? You know, and we're moving to South Korea. Mm. And I didn't even know where that was, and we didn't understand what was going on. Mm-hmm. My dad had got a promotion, and they wanted to send him over to work in South Korea, which was a very different country than it is today. Back then, you know,
I can only imagine.
It was still a military dictatorship. It was before the economy boomed. And so I went from being just a kid in Brooklyn to living in South Korea as an expat, which was very, very different than an expat's kid.
Wow. So you said you were 10 years old
I was
at this
10,
time.
yeah.
How did you adjust to that as a 10-year-old kid? Like, I assume not speaking any of the language.
I mean, immediately did, you know. I mean, we went to international school, right? But still, I was speaking Korean within 6 months. Mm-hmm. And kids are quick that way, you know. And I was running around with my friends. By the time I was 11, we were taking the buses all around Seoul. Mm-hmm. There wasn't any subway back then, really. Wow. And and so I think, like, if I look back on my life, that was really probably the most important development. It took me out of this is the first time I left the country. Mm-hmm. I barely even left the east coast of the States, you know. Wow. And so so we went over there and for 3 years. And then I came back and we moved back to Brooklyn and just things got normal again. And that was really strange, you know? I see. So did you have kind of that feeling in you even after you came back to Brooklyn that like, oh, now I know that there's this other world out there? Completely. I used to go to Chinatown just to get like an Asia fix, you know? Interesting. Yeah, because we'd traveled a little bit too. We'd gone to Hong Kong and Singapore, wherever. And right. I think when you take somebody that young age, and also, you know, because my family's mixed. My mother was not American. Mm-hmm. She'd emigrated to the U.S. from the Caribbean. She's from Trinidad and Tobago. Okay. So I had a mixed family already, a bit of an international family. Mm-hmm. So I think at that age, that was what spurred it. And then the second thing was when I was in college in upstate New York. Mm-hmm. I took a class on Japanese cinema, and not really knowing much about it beyond, you know, Akira Kurosawa. Mm-hmm. And I discovered they had a great cinema tradition here. And I just became obsessed with Japan. Cool. And I was like graduating. I was like, I that's where I gotta go.
I see. Wow. So you had kind of first Korea experience, and that kind of ignited in you this interest in Asia, perhaps. Mm-hmm. And then through, just exploring things that were available in your community, like Chinatown was the example, and like these courses and stuff, that just kind of led naturally then to Japan as like the next kind of adventure you saw yourself doing then?
Pretty much. I mean, once I started getting into the movies, Japanese movies, of which there's different eras and different styles and all of that, and then you start getting interested in the culture and the history. So I was reading whatever books I could find in English at the time. I picked up a history book. And pretty much was just like, okay, I've seen so much of this country on screen and in my imagination. I need to actually just get there.
Right.
So all of those things combined together. So I mean, I knew pretty much even before that, I was like, I wanted to leave the States. I just wanted to travel, as much as I could.
So when was your first experience coming to Japan?
I was 23 years old, so it was 1997.
Okay.
And I've been here pretty much ever since.
Wow.
Yeah.
So just out of curiosity, I suppose, what do you think, why was it like that Japan kind of drew you in more than just thinking, oh, I'd like to go back to like Korea and explore Korea more in depth? Like, was there something about like Japanese cinema that really struck you?
Yeah, I think that, I was a big fan and still am of a director, Ozu Yasujiro, who is now a world famous director years after his death, but there was something about in his movies that I found to be more just deeper and more touching than almost any cinema I'd ever seen.
Okay.
And I thought, and the more I learned about it, I thought, well, this is a culture that I think is really fascinating.
Okay.
And I think Korea was more just like that was my childhood. I know it already, So, but I think like a lot of foreigners who become Japanophiles, right? You have this image of what you want Japan to be. And then you get here and you're like, okay, this is not.
Yeah.
This is
in some ways it is, and yet in some ways it is mostly not. Yeah.
And you also go through like a boom. The first year it's like, oh, everything's perfect. This is the greatest place in the world.
Yeah. And
then I was here after about the fourth or fifth year. I was like, yeah, I think I need to leave.
There was another person who's on this series, Hiko Simon, hey Hiko, who I talked to about the same thing, this kind of cycle, like the expat cycle, and I'm so curious to learn if that's similar in expats who move to other countries, like, because yes, like lots of people have kind of talked about this sort of weird thing that happens among the expats, the expat community in Japan, which is like that first year to maybe year 3, you're just on this high of everything is new and exciting and cool.
I think it's 100% true in other countries from people I've talked to.
Really?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Because you have this idealized image of the country, but you also have this idealized image of yourself, of what you will be in this new land, and everything's going to be perfect. And then you realize that that's very immature.
You're still yourself.
Yeah. And you gotta create it. It's really hard work to do this.
Yeah.
And then sometimes, and Japan has its own particular challenges. The language is tough. You got to learn language. It's a very different culture to where we come from in the States. And that doesn't work for everybody.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have come for 2-3 years and they've gone back.
Tons.
They had enough.
Yeah, tons of people. So that's it's sort of interesting, like then to get to talk to people about like what brought them and kept them here too.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll get to that a little bit later.
Sure.
But I want to in continuing the discussion about what brought you to Japan, talk a little bit about kind of where the creative part intersects with your interests. Like you've already talked about film. How movies and theater, or rather films, kind of brought you to Japan specifically. But when I introduced you as Mr. OK Jazz. So like music is a big part of who you are now. Can you explain a little bit about how music became a big part of your life, especially here?
Sure. Go back very briefly just to being a kid in Brooklyn. I was 6 years old, and my parents gave me a little, this like kids record player. It looks like a big shoebox.
Oh yeah, yeah. Some of like adult friends have those. Yeah,
they're very retro now.
Yeah.
So I got one of those when I was 6, and I stole my parents' record of "Songs in the Key of Life" by my man.
Oh yeah, Stevie.
That's why I'm wearing Stevie today to represent. Got to represent Stevie Wonder.
Wow. For those who are just listening, he is wearing a Stevie Wonder T-shirt.
He was my first hero. And he still is today.
Yeah.
And so I was always into music, and I was always into radio. And New York was a great radio town. You know, we had stations, you know, really famous DJs like Frankie Crocker, Howard Stern before he went national, came out of New York.
Right. Yeah.
K-Rock, Z100, sports radio took off in New York. So radio was really important in those days. They dictated the trends, you know, and the DJs were celebrities. And I used to go to bed every night listening to the radio, you know, a little transistor radio. So I always wanted to be on the radio. And I was always a big music fan from the beginning. Then when I got into college, I started getting into jazz. So, you know, I grew up in the 80s, and I was listening to a lot of hip-hop, a lot of classic rock stuff. So I kind of went backwards, you know, hip-hop to where these samples come from. Well, they came from funk and soul records, and sometimes even R&B, old R&B records. And that led me into jazz.
I see.
When I was about 17 or 18, I heard my first jazz record. And, you know, it's like one of those moments that you just will always remember.
Cool.
And one of the key parts of your entire life. I heard this live album that my roommate's girlfriend, I think, brought in. And I was like, I don't know what this is, but I want to know everything.
I have to have more.
Yeah, and after that, I mean, I pretty much spent the next 3 years only buying jazz records.
Oh, wow.
CDs back then.
Okay.
So, you know, by the time I came to Japan, when I was 23, you know, I came over and I brought, you know, 300 or 400 CDs with me. And when I got here, I knew that Japan was a jazz country.
Yeah.
From way back.
Yeah.
What I didn't know was literally how often you would hear it outside of jazz shops or locations.
Oh, right. That's true.
So I noticed I was hearing real hardcore jazz records in supermarkets, in the doctor's office, hotel lobbies. And I mean real records, not smooth jazz, you know, not Kenny G or something like that, you know.
Oh, Kenny G for listening. Burn.
Yeah. Sorry, Kenny, but yeah. You know.
That's true, though. Like, really, wherever you go, like, you'll notice, I mean, yes, you will go to supermarkets sometimes, and there'll be, like, the Muzak version of, like, a Beatles song playing. Yeah.
Right.
But, like, that is true. Like, there's an emphasis, I think, in some places, especially in, like, kind of like these more, what should I call them, like, curated spaces that are emerging more and more these days. It's like people are really paying close attention to the music that's playing. I've seen, like, articles, oh, God, the guy's name is escaping me at the time. The Japanese composer and I believe DJ as well. I think he's based in New York now. Guy with round glasses and like kind of white hair. Oh,
Sakamoto Ryuichi?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, the name was just not coming to me. There was an article that he did. He had just like, there was this big article about how he had just curated a playlist specifically for like this tea house that opened in New York.
Yes, I remember reading that.
Fascinated
yes,
by
I remember that. Well, that's the thing. I mean, you must have noticed all around Japan, wherever you go, there are these, what I call music bars, which don't really exist in the rest of the world. They're starting to open now in places like London and New York and LA. And a music bar is a place where you go in and there's just a huge collection of vinyl records. I mean, it's thousands, right? So when I discovered that in what they call the jazz cafe version of that, and that jazz cafe tradition goes back to basically right after the war.
Okay.
And it really boomed in the 60s. These were places where people would go just to listen to records. It was very hard to buy these records. They were expensive.
I see.
You know, imported jazz records. And you couldn't play them at home. You know, Japanese house, you can't burst the music out loud. So these jazz cafes, these jazz kisaten, they were born all over the country.
Cool.
And, you know, and then later on you had soul bars and rock bars and all of that too. So when I first went to one of these jazz kisaten, and so I'm still, in my mid to late 20s. And I walked in, and it's a place that just recently closed, sadly, called Milestone in Takatanababa.
Oh, I don't know it.
And you walked in, and he's just got all these records. And you can have coffee, beer, whiskey. And I was like, this is the greatest shop I've ever seen in my entire life. And I'm going to come here every day that I'm in Japan. You know? This is going to be my home now.
Okay.
But what I didn't know at the time, this is pre-internet pretty much, you know. There were these places all over Japan. And so, you know, you'd go to one, and then they would, if you're in that neighborhood, go to this guy. I know the owner, say hello. And then I started going around, you know. And it just became my obsession. So, I was, you know, I brought a notebook. I was taking notes, you know. I was just, what's the owner? What kind of music do they play here? How many records do you have? What's the decor? And then a friend of mine was just like, you got to make a blog. You know? You got to make a blog. And I was like, well, I don't even know how to do that, you know. So I started the blog. But actually, that came a little bit later. I was already 33, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but I had years. I had about 5 or 6 years of notes. You know?
Wow.
notebooks.
And just like to insert like another little thing in here, like when I looked at your website, like I recognized a few places that you had listed that had opened recently, but there's just a wealth of information on your website now about like different places that you can go to and like the kind of vibe and like exactly as you're describing, but it's all now available in digital form.
That
must have taken some time.
It did. It took a lot of time. I mean, I've got 160 jazz spots profiled on
just
my
website.
For
Tokyo.
It's mainly the Tokyo metro area, Kanto area. But I mean, around the country, there's so many more.
Sure.
So that became like my thing, and I had the website going, and then that led to doing other stuff like writing articles for some of the newspapers here. I was on the radio for a while. I had my own radio show at Inter FM, and then from Inter FM, when that ended, I moved it to a podcast, and now the podcast I just last week did episode number 109. I don't just play jazz on there; I play everything. And actually, the origin of the name, Mr. OK Jazz, which is my DJ name and my avatar, online, actually doesn't come from jazz as in the States. It comes from the Congo. Because they're great. One of the greatest African bands ever was called OK Jazz, Orchestra Kinshasa.
Okay.
I think in French, Orchestra Quinoa or something like that.
Okay.
And they were very influenced by jazz coming in records, Latin records as well, back to Africa and bringing rhythms that had gone from Africa to the New World with slaves.
Oh, I see.
So when you hear what the genre of music called Congolese rumba, which I also became obsessed with, my favorite band was called Franco. He was the leader. Franco et les Puissants OK Jazz.
Okay.
And I decided I'm going to be Mr. OK Jazz. And
that's so cool.
That's going to be my name. And nobody's going to know what it means because they're going to be like, oh, is it okay for Tokyo? Or jazz is okay? Or, so nobody gets the meaning.
Yeah.
Except for about 4 or 5 people who are now very good friends who
cool.
immediately recognized,
they knew it right away.
Yeah, because they collect African
music.
That's
so cool.
Yeah.
So it's like there's this little like hidden kind of like riddle in the name there.
Yeah.
I was thinking about it. I was like, what if you put like a comma in there, like Mr. OK? Yes.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many variants you could do on that.
It's a nice name. Yeah, for sure. So that's so cool. So you mentioned in all of the things that you're doing now, you mentioned a podcast as well. What kind of stuff do you share on your podcast?
I mean, I pretty much try to mix it up these days. I mix it up between because I get a lot of new music now. I'm connected to a lot of labels, and a lot of musicians just send you stuff once you have a show.
I've heard this, yes. That once you are established as a thing, people will just send you like demos and contact you.
I get about 15 new albums a week.
Oh, that's so cool.
Just sent to me. Not always stuff that I want to necessarily keep.
But you appreciate
I really, and I if I like at least one song, I'm going to get it on my show. So I try to mix it between new releases, mainly jazz, world music, soul, Latin, no J-pop, sorry for J-pop fans out there.
You're not Mr. OK J-pop.
Yeah, that didn't make the cut. But yeah, I mean, I listen to pretty much everything.
Cool.
And so you'll hear, last week's episode I had Nigerian pop. I had this great all-girl punk band from the UK that I just discovered. This is all new stuff,
Okay.
And then I had some classic jazz. One of the great jazzmen of the last 50 years recently passed away. His name was McCoy Tyner.
Yeah, I saw that in the news.
So I had to put tribute to him because he's a very important musician to me. So the podcast is basically that. It's, as I say in the intro of the show, it's basically everything's been on my playlist over the last couple of weeks.
I see.
So you're gonna hear a mix of everything. You're not gonna like everything, because if you were, you would be me.
That's true. That's true. But I think one of the things, at least as a listener, like I've never DJ'd, nor do I plan to DJ, nor do I want to DJ. But like one of the things that's fun about just like listening to like friends' radio shows or whatever is identifying a person that has kind of some overlap with you in terms of the kind of music that they like, and then when you listen to the selections that they make, they'll find something that they've enjoyed and then they share it with their audience and you can go, oh, I really like that too. And that to me is like the fun part of music.
It is amazing. And what's really great is that now listeners have been contacting me.
Really?
So I've been doing the podcast for like 5+ years. So I'll get mails from listeners from a lot of different countries, and often was this, or can you tell me more about this? Or what do you recommend? And a lot of people are like, hey, I'm coming to Japan. Can I buy you a drink in a jazz bar? I'm like, hey, don't have to ask me twice to buy you a drink in a jazz bar. Anybody out there?
Yeah, that's so cool.
We'll always accept that invitation.
You hear that, internet?
Yeah. Very happy to accept those.
That's cool.
And that's been great. I mean, through the show and the website, I've met people from the Philippines, Turkey, Brazil, Colombia, obviously a lot of people from the States.
Yeah.
And of course, tons of people in Japan as well.
Right.
So I'll go to a gig and somebody will just come up to me and, be like, hey, I listened to your show. And I'm like, that's really great. Because, when you're doing something like this, which is pretty niche, I play a lot of music that's not very popular.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just wonder, am I just speaking into
the void?
The void. Yeah. Is there anyone out there who's digging it? But now, it's easier to track your listenership. I mean, I've kind of plateaued out a bit, but there's enough people that listen. I average 3,000 or 4,000 per episode. And that's not enough to get sponsorship, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, you gotta have to different conversation.
Yeah. You know that. That's that's tough.
It's a challenge. But anyway, I want to kind of in talking a little bit then about the different kinds of people who are tuning into your show. I want to kind of go then to maybe a little bit more of back to Japan specifically, I suppose, because that's obviously where your creative project here is based. In going around and collecting all of this information and connecting with jazz bar owners and musicians and so on, what has been kind of their response to your project? Have they been really, really receptive to it, or have they kind of been like, oh, who's this guy that's kind of going around and getting all of our information and putting it out there in English? What's kind of been the response to your work?
Absolutely both. Well, I mean, a lot of times, to start, some of these old jazz joints, some of the really old ones, they're not even online. There's no website. There's barely even a phone. There's a pay phone, in the shop. So when you go in, especially as a foreigner, the first reaction of the regulars could sometimes just be, oh no, here we go.
Yeah.
But I'm used to that now, and I know exactly how to do it. You go in, you speak a little Japanese, let them know that you know the system.
Yeah.
Table charge. You're not going to cause any trouble. You're not here to get drunk.
Yeah.
And then you just mention the music. You're like, I'm a big fan. And then, oh, okay, because it's pretty much only fans that go to these places. So the owners have been very interested when I explained what I was doing, saying that I want to share your world to jazz fans outside Japan because they don't know about it, and they're going to fall in love with it. So once I explain it, they're very receptive.
I see.
And after a couple years of doing the site, the site had been going up maybe 6 or 7 years, changed shape, and eventually it became what it is now, where it's kind of this database. So I actually will show them on my phone, or if I've got a computer with me, and I'll be like, look, this is what it is. It's an English profile of your beautiful shop that I want to share with the fans who come to Japan, because so many musicians come, and people up until recently have been coming to Japan a lot, and they don't know about this world. And so I basically created the only English language source for it, and they've been very receptive.
That's good.
And then what took it to the next level was 5 years ago, who's now a very good friend of mine. At the time, he was an acquaintance, a photographer named Philip Arneal, and he was also a Japan resident. We ran in similar circles. We used to go to the same gigs. We knew some similar people, but we weren't really buddies or anything. And he had done various photo projects in the music world here. So he called me one day, and he said, hey, let's have a drink. I want to talk to you about a project. And he proposed, let's take what you've been doing, but to the next level. Let's get a visual project going, because I was taking pictures on my phone, one of the old flip top phones, you know? So they were terrible.
They were taking pictures with a potato.
It was, you could see nothing, you know, it was just a blur of records or something. So he said, look, what do you think about going to all these places and, capturing them properly before they close? And I said, man, I've been waiting for somebody to offer that kind of project. That sounds great. So he came up, we made a list of places to go. We started going pretty regularly. And then we did the whole Kanto region.
Cool.
And eventually we started going all around Japan.
Yeah, Kanto is the eastern part of Japan.
Yeah, sorry, the Tokyo metro area.
Yeah.
But there were these jazz spots everywhere. So Philip and I would go. He's the photographer. I would sometimes contact the places or places I'd already been, owners that I knew were receptive to us. And we went, and that is a completely separate website of just the pictures called TokyoJazzJoints.com. And that's taken off because people immediately visually could see what it's one thing to read about a place.
Sure.
Oh, it's a dusty, charming little room. You know, it's another thing to see really beautiful pictures of these places with the albums, the gorgeous faces of the owners. You know, it really is like being let into their home.
It really is. When you visit these places, like I've been to just, you know, a handful here and there, not anywhere near as many as you have. But like I think of like, do you know like Bar Soul Stream in Shinjuku?
Oh yeah, sure.
So like that place, for example, whenever I go there, I just feel like I'm walking into like the owner's like living room, kind of. Like that's kind of
that is exactly
vibe.
what it's like.
There's just a bunch of people like hanging out. Like there's tables and everything like that, but it's like there's just the owner is like a part of the establishment. It's not just the space. It's like also just like the owner is just part of the vibe too.
Oh yeah. And you know, it's funny because when you explain that to them, sometimes they don't really even recognize it sometimes, and they sometimes are a little shy even, like, wait, you're going to show our pictures? You know, like, yeah, this is a photo project and people are going to read my site and they're going to see the photo site. And it's been really good because we've been able now, so Philip and I visited over 160 jazz spots all around Japan, actually close to 170, I think. And we've had exhibitions now in the States, in the UK, in Germany. We even got to go to Penang Jazz Festival in Malaysia, so we had a little Asian connection as well. And we're constantly showing the pictures more and more places. And eventually going to hopefully publish a book, a coffee table book, which is basically a photo book of all these incredible old jazz spots. Yeah. But what's really interesting is that the owners, they are amazed when we express our love for them. They're, you know how Japanese older people can be. Oh no, it's my little shop, so dusty and dirty. You're from New York, you know. You must be used to great jazz spots. And, and I'm like, we don't have anything as cool as what you have here. What you have here is very, very special, and it's actually an honor for me to talk to you, to take your picture, to write about you, and to introduce you to other people because it's a part of a culture in Japan that is very uniquely Japanese, but other people don't necessarily know about.
Yeah, this is something that has come up many, many times in speaking with Japan-based creatives. This niche culture in Japan that, like, whatever, like, I've said this so many times probably at this point, but like whatever your thing is, whatever you're interested in, like you can find somebody probably who's doing that thing. But I think that this music culture specifically, because so many people can easily enjoy music, I think music is a particular particular topic where there's so many like niche places to investigate. Whatever genre or subgenre or subgenre you're into, you can find it, and there will be like, you know, at least a dozen people there that are into the same thing and want to talk to you and are excited about it. But just as you're describing, they'll be like, us?
Exactly.
What's so great about us?
They don't even realize how unique it is, and especially, and we're seeing this now in the current world situation where people are locked up at home. You know, because people always ask me, so what is it that's so special about these old jazz cafes and bars? You can listen to this music at home now. And I said, yeah, of course you can, and I do, but you're not acknowledging the human interaction that takes place.
Yeah, the community.
It's a communal activity to sit with like-minded people and have a drink and talk about the records and just kind of groove with it together.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that's a really irreplaceable activity. And so, you know, if that gets taken away and everything becomes just this sort of, you know, immediate access downloading type of, I can listen on my phone. So look, I listen on my phone too. I listen at home.
Sure, same.
It's great. I love it. But I make time out of my week, at least once a week, to go and sit in one of these places, either by myself or to meet a friend or to talk to the owner. It's really, really important, even beyond the music, and especially in a place like Tokyo, because Tokyo is overcrowded, but it's also very alienating. You get up, you take a crowded train, but you're by yourself. You eat ramen by yourself. You live in a 1K studio apartment. That's so many people's lives here.
Right.
So you can actually be in the world's biggest city and be completely by yourself. Going to this kind of environment is, I think, so incredibly soothing. It's almost like it's therapeutic.
You kind of get a sense that you get to like sort of I don't want to say detach, but you just get to kind of like disconnect a little bit. Like as you're talking about this experience of going for a drink and going to talk with somebody, like that too, that's the part of it that I also really enjoy. So like, to give an example of this experience, like, Ink Cocktails.
Yes.
I think you've played there.
I have DJed
I've
there.
seen your name on their informational thing.
Yes.
I have to come see you next time.
DJed
I was there. I like to visit that place because it's like the speakeasy style place.
Yeah.
Underground.
Yeah. Right.
They have these really nice cocktails, and like the bartenders wear like the white suits, and like they make a little conversation, but
dark.
not a lot if you don't want to. So like a friend of mine was DJing one night, and I was just like, I'm just gonna go and sit in front of the booth. Like I had something I was writing that I was working on, and I just sat there for a couple hours just listening to him play records, and because they have only vintage audio equipment.
That is
there,
right. That
which
place
creates
is very,
another
very serious,
really cool atmosphere.
They're a very serious audio system that they like to talk about too. They'll explain in detail. That's a great spot.
Like that,
and it's brand new too. It's only been open a year.
But they've done. I really like that, and it was just me, and like my friend was on the other side of the counter playing records all night, and I would just occasionally glance up from like what I was writing or like what I was working on and be like, that's a nice track, and then he would hand me the record and I would get to look at it and read it and like take a picture and we'd chat about it, and then we'd go back to whatever we were doing. It was wonderful.
I mean, isn't that great? Yeah, exactly. And I think people need that kind of interaction, and as a music fan especially, from a night like that you might walk home with 5 or 6 new things to listen to.
Yeah, exactly.
And you mentioned Soulstream and Shinjuku as well. Yeah. Same thing. You can make requests there, but he also, Oki-san, I think his name is, he'll actually like tell you about the records. I mean, the people who run these places are very knowledgeable. So I've learned more about our music from the States, and not just jazz, but funk and soul and hip hop from Japanese bar owners and DJs.
Their heads are like catalogs. It's amazing.
It's remarkable.
Of information, and also they know exactly where every single record is, even if they have like 3,000 on the wall behind them.
Well, Japanese people, these kind of collectors always say that this is a very Japanese trait, actually, that not just collecting, but being like, when you dive into whatever your field of study is, you have to be almost like, tunnel vision with it. And so you become an uber expert basically over the years, But I've had one of the great experiences I've had doing this project over the years was, there used to be a place called Jazz Pub Misho in Shinjuku Sanshome. And Misho-san, the owner, at the time was already 80. He's like my Japanese grandfather. And he used to kindly but very emphatically scold me because I didn't know a very obscure out-of-print jazz record from the 1950s. Okay. And he'd be like, I don't understand, James-san. You said you're a jazz fan. How can you not know this? And I'll be like, well, sorry, I just didn't know it. And he would be like, what do you mean you've never heard of Willis Jackson? I was like, well, Willis Jackson, I mean, I don't know. I mean, is he on CD? I used to buy CDs. He's like, okay. And he showed me his record shop. He has 18 albums by Willis Jackson. Okay. And I'm like, okay, bring it on. Let's. So here I am, fairly young guy from the States, jazz fan, hanging out with an 80-year-old Japanese guy in his tiny bar, and he is pulling out vintage original jazz records from the 50s and 60s and teaching me about the music. Yeah, he can't speak a word of English. Yeah, and that's Japan in many ways. Sometimes you can find people here, whether it's cooking pizza or French food or
hyper concentration on their thing.
And that was unexpected too, because I didn't know that when I got here. Didn't expect to get that.
I think that a lot of people think that they can kind of arrive and just sort of like smash their way into whatever space they're interested in, but it's like, no, it's going to take you some time. Sure. For sure. And this kind of actually leads me to my question. We're already talking about it, so I haven't asked you directly about kind of what you find joyful about doing something creative in Japan. I think we've kind of already covered that a little bit. I want to maybe address a little bit, I think we've kind of touched on it a little bit already. Maybe some of the challenges of doing something creative in Japan, whether it's working with people or, accessibility of information. What have you found challenging about doing something like this?
Well, I think that, the first thing is this: if you're going to be here, I don't mean just temporarily, but if you're deciding to live here for any extended period of time, you have to study the language. I mean, we all know that. It's not easy to go from English to Japanese, but it will make everything in your life, not just your creative projects, but your daily life, so much better.
Yes.
Frankly, it's unthinkable that people could live here long and don't speak.
I am shocked when I meet people
I don't know how they do it.
I don't either.
You know? But it's not just the language. You have to understand the way of thinking, especially if you're doing, and it doesn't matter. You think, oh, you know, it's creative. Oh, I'm hanging out with these funky guys, these hip hop kids or whatever. But when you're doing business, it's still a Japanese way of doing business. Even something as simple as you got to be on time. You know, it's like you got to be on time. When you set up an uchiawase, a meeting, you have got to be there on time.
Yeah.
But you also have to not expect that meeting to resolve anything.
Yeah, that's true.
You know,
that is also very true.
We're Americans. We're used to like get right into it. Okay, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Vote. All right, let's do this. All right, go for it. 20 minutes, we're out. That's not how it works here.
That's a great point.
And that was very difficult for me. I mean, I had to really learn, you know, I mean, I'm from New York. I talk a lot. I talk fast. You know, I want to get things done. Japan is, you've got to take things a little bit slower.
Yeah.
And you also have to learn to read between the lines.
Yep.
You don't challenge someone in a meeting of 6 people. You got to go and speak to them around when nobody's there, and then understand how people are talking in the meeting. Oh, that guy actually doesn't like the idea. But he's not going to tell you directly, I don't like the idea.
Yeah, they'll ask a question to be like, what do you think about this specific? Like,
yeah.
They'll phrase it as like a question and make it softer. Like you have to read body language.
Sure.
And your point about expecting things to not be resolved in a meeting is so true. Oh, that was so frustrating for me for a long time.
I mean, I worked in a Japanese company briefly, and it was very educational, but my personality did not fit. And I mean, the morning meetings that just seemingly went on, and nothing really of substance was gotten to. I found it excruciating. That remains a challenge. It's something I've been here a long time, but I still have to force myself. Okay, slow down. Speak proper keigo, you know, proper polite Japanese, and don't get ahead of yourself, because they need to go at the pace that they are going to go at. And I am a guest here.
Right.
I cannot walk in and bring my way of doing business in a room full of 6 or 7 Japanese people. That's, you know, that's the heights of American arrogance to do
and
that,
if you do that, you're just going to set yourself back. Like if people see that you are making an effort to work like with them, I think they respect that much more.
Well, haven't you found in Japan that if you just make the effort to even speak a little bit of polite Japanese, which is a different grammar, it's a little hard to use. You make a little bit of effort to do it in a business setting. The amount of respect that you get is, this person gets it, you know.
Yeah, I think it goes a long way, you know, when you really make the effort, even if it's imperfect. If I will say there are, and this is true, I think of any country, any culture, there are going to be people that just don't respond well to someone that doesn't speak their language perfectly. There are going to be people that just don't have the patience to deal with somebody that doesn't speak fluently.
Sure.
That's going to happen in any country. But there are also groups of people that understand, like, you're a learner, you know, you're working on it, you're trying to be someone that's contributing positively to your community or to your organization, and so they're willing to work with you.
Yeah.
Like, I think as long as you kind of try to focus your efforts on improving yourself and, working to show that you are making an effort as well, like, it'll go a long way.
And that applies not just in Japan. I mean, every country I've visited, you just got to make a small effort to some greetings, a couple of cultural things, and the smiles will come out. Yeah, the smiles will come out, and you're welcomed in. And you know, that's something you learn after traveling a while.
Yeah.
You know, when I was younger, I didn't do that very well, but now I'm much better at it.
And I think just to another kind of challenge, then we talked a little bit briefly before we started recording this too, is just the purely like from a logistics perspective of doing something creative in Japan, like as a full-time job is also very hard. It's so hard. So it's like, and this relates to another kind of aspect that's interesting of Japanese culture, which is compartmentalization, where like when you meet someone in like a jazz cafe or a jazz bar or something like that, they'll like another customer, I mean, they might be very, knowledgeable about the topic, and they have lots of information to share about that. But they might have like this other separate kind of life that they live. Like they're a salaryman. Like I've had, there's a guy that I helped out with a record project recently, and he's everything. When you look at his social media, it's all records and rehearsals and my band and we're making this and test pressing and stuff like that. And then when you talk to him in the bar, he's like, oh no, 3 days a week I'm just a regular old salary man. It's like,
100% true, because I know a great musician who plays saxophone, Inoue Osamu-san. Shout out to Inoue-san.
Hey.
And by day he is a lawyer.
Yeah.
You know, because he can't, it's very hard to make a good living as a gigging jazz musician, but he has his career, but he's able to fund his own recordings. Mm-hmm. So I'd known him for a couple of years before I realized that he actually had this whole other life.
That's cool.
But yeah, I mean, it is hard. The thing is like, I think that with something like what I've been doing, this came out of a passion. I never got into it with the idea that it would make any money at all.
Right.
So when I make even a little bit, I'm really happy.
Right.
You know, I mean, I've kept a semi-permanent day job to pay the bills.
Yeah.
Because you got to take care of business, take care of my family.
Of course.
But, you know, I think that but the other thing as well is I think that people do get, you know, if all you're doing is focusing on how can I make more money, you're probably doing the wrong thing. Yes, we got to make a living, but it has to come from a different purpose than that. And, you know, everybody has to make their own individual decision based on their own lives. Do I want to take a job just to make some cash and do everything else on the side? Because then it takes a lot of time. You know, I mean, to put together one of my podcasts probably takes about 6 to 8 hours a week, which is not that much, but it's time.
It's time,
you know, it's time.
Yeah.
And that comes outside of my money-making job and my family responsibilities.
Right.
But I do it because I still love it, and I would feel completely lost without it.
Sure.
You know? So you make that commitment, get up early, do it late, whatever. And then things, if it's good and your passion's there, you'll start to get some benefits. You might not make a living. You might have to keep your day job. But I mean, I get now, like I was saying, I get a lot of free music every week. I get to meet and hang out with musicians. I get to go to free gigs. I mean, that covers a lot of money.
Cool. Yeah.
I mean, if you told me that at the beginning, this is all you're going to get, I'd be like,
I'd do that.
I'll sign up for that. You know, that's perfect for me.
Absolutely. And this actually, like, we're working backwards on my questions. Actually, like, you answered the question before I asked it. That's what we've been doing this whole interview. Another one of my key questions for today was just about advice in general. Like, you know, what is something that you recommend that people do or not do? And this is, I think, a great example of that. You know, having to make those decisions for yourself and go, what am I really setting out to do here? Like, like when you want to, you know, make a podcast or when you want to put something creative out there, are you looking to get, you know, popular on the internet or, or are you trying to
and also,
make
you know,
there's
like an age thing too. I mean,
Sure.
I mean, I'm in my 40s, and you know, younger people in their teens and 20s, and they're seeing it as very much a career.
Sure.
You know, I never did that. If I can make it at some point, I'd be happy. But that's a very different perspective. So, you know, again, you know, make the decisions about what is your goal with this thing. And I think that in my experience, I mean, when people put passion into their work, it shows. You can tell. You can tell people who are really committed to something and people who are just doing it for a paycheck or they want to be famous.
Yeah.
And, you know, but again, do it. Put the time in. And what I also found is think about your audience. What helped me improve. I mean, I'm not where I want to be yet with my podcast, but I started thinking about who am I talking to.
Sure.
Right?
You have to.
And so I will make like 2 or 3 different scenarios depending on what kind of like music I'm introducing or what I'm saying about the music of who would be the perfect person to be talking about this particular record with. And that made it become a lot more natural. Yeah. And so when you're putting that passion into your projects, don't think about how can I reach 20,000 people online. It's like, no, think about a couple people that you know. Think about one person who has zero knowledge of what you're doing. Yeah. And one who is your friend but doesn't really care much, but you want to try to convince them. And think of one person who might be an expert. And how would you talk to all these 3 different people? That's how I try to do it on my show. And I think I've gotten better. I think. If I listen to the old ones, definitely they were frankly terrible. You know, my first podcast.
But you learn, you know.
Yeah, you get better, and you know, of course, practice.
Absolutely.
You know, like so. I mean, this weekend I'll record episode 110.
Very cool.
And you know, if things keep going the way they are, I might have a lot of time at home. Right? We're recording this, if anybody's listening, way in the future, in the midst of a global pandemic.
Yeah, the situation. Thankfully, at the moment of recording is not serious in Japan. We're very lucky and thankful for that. But hopefully, the way that I see it though too, like going back to your point about the audience as well, like if you don't listen to your audience and just keep trying to smash down like smash into their faces the thing that you want to make, like again, like why are you trying to make that thing? Like if you're not responding to the needs of the people who want to learn something from you or like want the thing that you're going to make, like why are you making something?
And it's also, I mean, it's easier than ever now. It's easier than ever to communicate with the people out there who are consuming your work. Okay. So I mean, if there's one extra bit of advice I would give, it would be like, you know, just talk to people. I mean, I've traveled, been very lucky to travel around Asia quite a bit, and even since I started doing more, writing and broadcasting. But it's not even about that. Just talk to everyone. Like I actually talked to one of the best conversations I ever had in Japan, and this was a long time ago. It was when I was living in a foreign student's dorm. There was a little tofu shop. This was in the west part of Tokyo on the Odaku line, so not near the center of town.
Okay.
And there was a little tofu shop, and one day I went by, and the old guy wasn't there. It was a younger guy. It looked about my age, and so I went up to chat with him, and I was like, yeah, I pass by the shop every day. I don't really buy much tofu, Oh, my dad's not feeling well, so I'm running the shop. He said, oh, you're going to take it over, And he's like, yeah, I'm the eldest son. We're quite traditional family. This shop's been here for 200 years, and I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
200 years. Yeah, so just a daily conversation, making greetings, being polite, turned into something really interesting. So he invites me into the shop. We have tea. He gives me some of the tofu.
Wow.
He starts telling me about the family, and they have this family had been working in the area when that wasn't even part of Tokyo. So this unexpected encounter led to one of the great experiences I've had in Japan. And it's not about a famous site or this great event. It was just about, I happened to just talk to this dude.
Yeah.
And that's something that maybe when I was in my 20s, I wouldn't have done.
Right.
You kind of, you want to be cool or whatever.
Or I also think there's the shyness and there's the nervousness of just going up and being like, what's your deal?
Yeah.
What's going on here?
And I've seriously, I think 9 out of 10 times people will be so receptive to you. So, people that, you want to be creative, you want to do these things, work on your craft, but also like go out and communicate. That's what I would say is the most important thing.
For sure. Having a network of just interesting people to like look at and see what are they doing, what are they talking about, what are they into right now. It's so inspiring. And like when you get in like those ruts too, we're like, what am I going to do? What am I going to make? Like having people like that inspire you or that interest you is really, really great to have.
Well, you must have found that with the work that you're doing, right? I mean, it's sort of, sometimes you can get kind of in a rut in your own personal thing. You get out and you see what other people are working on.
Absolutely.
And that it inspires you. It gives you good tips.
Yeah.
Sometimes it tells you not what to do.
Exactly.
Because you're like, oh, I didn't really like where they went with that.
This is I started this podcast for many reasons. I wanted to talk to people in depth, like what is this interesting person doing? How are they approaching it? Like all of us have different strategies, according to our personalities, according to the type of work that we're doing, according to who our audience is. There's no right way to do it there's no one size fits all solution for everybody. So it's like, how do we introduce many different approaches to our creative work and talk about what has worked for us and what hasn't worked for us and so on. But we're coming close to the end of our time.
Oh, wow.
So it flew by. Holy cow. When we talk about music, it just goes by so quickly.
It's, as I've been told, I found the perfect medium for myself. They were like, James, you finally got an invisible outlet to just ramble about music for as long as you want.
But you got listeners. You're doing something right,
Well, I think there's enough of us out there.
You're good to go. You've already hinted maybe at kind of what the next sort of project that you have coming up is, potentially this photo book of the jazz.
Yes. So Philip and I, we have been talking a lot about this. So we've had a lot of good exhibitions in multiple parts of the world now, and a lot of people love the pictures. Nobody's done something like this in Japan. We're just waiting for the right publishing opportunity because it's quite expensive to put a photo book together. Any rich listeners you may have who would love to fund us, cut us a check for
dear rich listeners.
25,000 US should cover it, 1,000 copies. But what we're going to do with the project is we've been featured in a lot of media, a lot of music media and photo media. And so hopefully we're going to, Philip, when all this blows over, hopefully we'll come back to Japan. We're going to go to visit more places, get up to about 200 places visited and photos shot. And then we'll explore how to get that into a proper book.
That'd be super cool, because like that could even serve as like a guidebook sort of thing even.
Oh yeah, there's photo books about everything in Japan.
Totally.
So why can't we get this Jazz Cafe one?
Yeah, because there's a friend of mine, she's also been on the show. Like she just did a book called Plant-Based Tokyo, which she did about like plant-based restaurants, like menus that are doing like plant-based foods. She didn't want to make it like a guidebook, like Lonely Planet style, but she approached it as a photo book, and then she wrote like these very like philosophical kind of like introductions to the chefs.
That sounds great.
Awesome.
That's kind of taken off here as well.
And it was really, really well received. And so like I think your project too sounds like something that like, a person who is into that, would pick it up and go, yes, I want to go to this place, this place, and this place.
Well, that's the thing, is it's been really great to work with Philip on this photo project, because it complements like my site, which is more of just like an info site, where you can read about the places and you can read the other articles I wrote. You can listen to my show, and and then the visual side of it appeals not even just to people who are into jazz, but people who are Japanophiles.
Right.
And then you also have the people who are photo people who are like, I don't even heard a jazz album, but I'm looking at it from a photo perspective. So you got a lot more appeal there. So that's one project. I'm going to keep the podcast going.
Cool.
There was another big project that we were just in discussions about, which now is going to be on hold because of the global situation.
Right.
So that, catch me on social media in a couple months for that announcement.
Where can we find you if we are not already following you on the internet?
Yes,
where can we find you?
You can find me mainly on Twitter and Instagram.
Okay.
I don't really use Facebook. So Twitter and Instagram are the best. Just look up @Mark Mr. OK Jazz Tokyo, MR OK Jazz Tokyo.
Gotcha.
And my website is tokyojazzsite.com. The photo site is tokyojazzjoints.com.
Gotcha.
And my podcast is called the OK Jazz Podcast.
And we can get your podcast wherever we like to listen, I assume.
iTunes, and you can listen. Actually, there's a player on the website. On my website, you can go to the podcast page. You can stream it there, or on your phone. You can download it on iTunes, and it's on SoundCloud.
Gotcha.
And I'm looking to try and get it on Spotify as well.
Okay, got it. Well, I will put links to all of those things in the video and the audio description, so people can check it out. Definitely check it out.
Yes,
I will
please.
continue to follow you, and I will definitely have to come and see you next time you DJ at Ink.
Well, no, please,
I love that.
Yeah, definitely come by. That would be great.
We'll finish up here unless you have anything else that you would like to add.
No, I'm pretty good. Just a shout out to my jazz family for all of their help and support. They put up with a lot of me coming home with obscure records and putting them on. Oh, Dad, another record from the Congo. It's number 75 now. So
that's pretty cute.
They put up with a lot of my quirkiness. So thanks to them.
That's great. Yeah. That's great.
And thanks to you, Alicia, for inviting me. Appreciate it. It's great to chat.
Thanks very much for coming. I really enjoyed this discussion.
Thanks
it was super cool. Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Non-Native Creative. If you liked this episode, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Feel free to leave comments about this episode in the comment section too. Please make sure to stop by the project Patreon at patreon.com/nonnativeCreative. Patrons can get access to Patreon-only discussions, bonus behind-the-scenes media, interview transcripts, and access to patron-only live streams. Your support will help make sure the series can continue to share exciting, interesting stories from creative people working across borders. Thanks again for watching. See you next week.